So this is the screencast for Intro Psych review session with Mrs. Turner for Intro Psych at at Linn-Mar High School. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but you can find these on my Google site as well. But to get ready for this test, make sure you know the thinking process to determine what you're going to do. Knowing how to get the right answer is much better than just guessing it and getting the right answer. Make sure you can define psychology. We've gone over this a lot in class, so you should have that memorized by now. And make sure you look back at these pages. These got some key ideas that you're going to be responsible for. How is psychology a science? Components of an experiment, and what psychologists do. And we've done little projects over each of these too, so look back at those as well. For contributors to psychology, who started functionalism? Hopefully you know that's William James. Introspection was used by Wundt and Titchener. Psychology to expand equal rights was the Clarks. Behavioralism was John Watson. Father of American psychology is William James, again. Had the idea of the unconscious mind is Sigmund Freud. And trained dogs using classical conditioning was Ivan Pavlov. Opened the first lab in the U.S. This is a tricky one. It's G. Stanley Hall. There will be a test question on that, so make sure you know that. The 4 goals, look back at your binder pages 3 and 4 for practice ideas. Make sure you can not only name the goals of describe, explain, predict, change, and the control, but that you can also apply them. And so here's an example for frustration. To describe it, what does somebody look like when they're frustrated? To explain it in general terms, why would somebody be frustrated? For specific examples of prediction, somebody will be frustrated when they are taking the test and don't know the answer. And change your control, make sure you address how are you going to help that individual. I would help them by taking deep breaths or pointing out what they already know. You can't just say, oh, tell them to stop it. That won't count. For pre-modern psychology, this is the stuff that is not scientific. These all occurred before 1879. And they're not modern, like I said, because they're not scientific. They don't use scientific methods to test them out. You have at the bottom of page 5 in your binder, you do have some few review questions, reflection questions that you are responsible for answering, so that's a good thing to go back and review. For the perspectives, there will be a matching section on this, so make sure you can tell the differences between the perspectives. Lying due to peer pressure would be sociocultural. Lying would be different if it were humanistic, because you'd say, well, you chose to lie because you didn't have enough support to make the right decision. Rationalization is a cognitive function, and so that would be the cognitive perspective. Brain defect is going to relate to the biological perspective. And psychoanalytic, I would expect you to say something about childhood and the unconscious. For behavioral, I'd expect you to say something about a learned action that's been reinforced. And if you hear people lie when you were young, so now you do it. So is this unconscious or is this learned? That's an example. It could go either way, so you need to make sure you are clarifying for me which one it is. All right, ethics. The ethics, don't forget, you read about some in the book, but there's also the one about doctor-patient relationships that was added. And make sure you know all the ethics. They will not be listed for you on the exam, so you need to know about debriefing and informed consent and confidentiality and so forth. Make sure you can tie ethics to the Milgram study. This will be a test question. I'm not trying to fool you. How do ethics relate to Milgram study? You have a whole page on that in your binder. Nature and nurture will also be part of this exam, so make sure you look over the notes on page 12 and look at the application of nature and nurture. And make sure you can talk about both sides of it. For example, shyness. You can be genetically predisposed to being shy, but also your environment can encourage you to be shy. So that interaction of both nature and nurture is something you should be able to support. Oh, and saying somebody is naturally shy, that doesn't score. You didn't tell me what naturally means, so make sure that you don't use that. Research components, hypotheses and variables and all that good stuff. You did a mock experiment, so make sure you go back and you look at that. There's examples in your binder, and also I think it's page 23. I'm not sure if that's the right page, but you've got the directions for that mock research assignment that would be good to go back and add. Hypotheses must be written in an if-then format. And make sure you can identify what's the independent variable, what's the dependent variable, and come up with some confounding variables as well. Operational definitions, we've spent a lot of time working on this. So you take one of those variables, the independent or the dependent, and you describe what it is and, more importantly, how to measure it. And that can be on a scale of 1 to 10, or it can be a percentage, or it can be a time, but something with numbers is needed for those. And then make sure that you have a relevant population sample and experimental control groups. I will not accept just people or just children as populations. That's too general. For methods, the research methods, we've got both correlational and experimental methods, so those are their two categories, but there's different specifics within each one. Smart pill versus a placebo is going to be a blind study. Rare genetic mutation will be a case study because it is rare. Advertising on a large group of people, a survey would be great to get a lot of information pretty quick and easy. Interactions with strangers would be a naturalistic observation because all I have to do is watch people interact. Vitamin C for the quality of life will be longitudinal, that's over the lifespan. And don't forget to go back, the Cawthorn and the cohort, those are effects, those are not methods, those are side effects. And so I would know that the Hawthorne effect is most common with laboratory observation, and the cohort effect is most likely with the cross-sectional research method. For the careers and the degrees, make sure you know the difference between basic and applied psychologist. That's way back on the second day of class. And make sure you know how to earn a doctorate, the BA versus MA versus a PhD in PsyD, and all the things you have to go through to do that. As I mentioned, PhD versus PsyD, which one is research-based, which one is people-based. And then there's all the subfields of psychology that, again, you did an assignment on. So if I'm testing students for reading abilities, that's going to be school psychologists because they're working with students rather than teachers. A police officer, that's in the area of law, and so that's going to be a forensic psychologist. And the limits of behavior is pretty general, so that's going to be a research or experimental psychologist. Make sure you're applying things correctly. I won't accept school counselors. They're not a psychologist. They're wonderful people, but they're not psychologists, so don't use them. And if you are a psychologist, you must have a doctorate degree. So it's either a PhD or an MD. If you're a psychiatrist, you'll have a medical degree in MD. Oops, there we go. Psychiatrists are not psychologists. And so I think that's it. If you have any questions, please come in and see me during early session and think of all the things we've talked about in class to help you prepare for this exam. Good luck.